All right, so let's start today's lecture. So I'm going to continue talking about Darwin and the basic structure of the theory of evolution as it's understood today and as it was developed in 1859, or at least introduced to the world in 1859. But before I start this lecture, are there any questions from the last lecture? Okay. I just have one other announcement. Well, two announcements. First of all, I'm going to try to, or I will put the page numbers from the 8th edition that would correspond to the page numbers I assigned for readings from the 9th edition. So if you have the 8th edition, well, that's all you can get a hold of. You'll know which pages to read. There's not much of a difference from one edition of these textbooks to the next. I mean, you know that they turn out these new editions so rapidly to kill the used book market, right? That's why they do this. So I will, if you have the 8th edition or you found it cheap on Amazon, I'll make it so you can use that. And then, what was the extra material called again? I'm sorry, Mastering Biology. She's not a mouthful, but it's a Mastering Biology. It's also included in the Campbell edition that you can buy at the bookstore. That's only really required for 1A. So the thought is that some people buy the textbook once. I'm certainly not using the Mastering Biology, and I'm pretty darn certain that my colleagues aren't as well. That is to say, my I1B colleagues aren't as well. So if you don't have the Mastering Biology portion of that textbook and you're only interested in taking 1B or you've already taken 1A, don't worry about it. Okay. All right. The other announcement I wanted to make concerns the labs. We had intended to roll out all new evolution labs this semester. You guys would have been the guinea pigs. We're going to roll them out next semester in the spring, but there are a large number of evolution labs that are completed and ready to test out on guinea pigs. And if you're willing, this is not something I'm going to offer extra credit for, but if you're interested in running through these labs, probably on a Friday, come talk to me. What would you get out of it? Well, you get out of it the knowledge that you helped out future students and helped us develop the labs. And I would imagine, though I can't guarantee this, but I would imagine that by going through the material in more than one way, you will learn material so well that it would be very difficult not to do well on the exam. Right? So just come to me, maybe during office hours, or shoot me an email, and then we will make an arrangement to start running through some of these labs. And they're all computer-based, or I should say all computer-based, but you will notice probably in the course of the next week or two that a lot of IMAX will mysteriously appear in the labs in 1A, or 1B rather, our labs, and that has to do with these future labs that we'll be rolling out in the spring. So there's a computer component. I'm the guy who wrote all the computer software for this stuff. All right, so last time I talked about the components of a successful theory of evolution. We talked about the fact of evolution, the pattern, and the mechanism or process. You need to have all three of these components to have a successful theory of evolution. I also talked about this concept that makes evolutionary biology and astronomy and other historical sciences like geology sciences, right? And that's this uniformitarian assumption. But before I started about Darwin, let's talk about some of the unsuccessful theories that predated Darwin's. And I would argue that for many centuries before Darwin published Origin of Species, one common thought about how organisms or species were arranged was the so-called chain of being. I always think of this as the latter, and I think people at the time did as well. The idea being that organisms, species were arranged or linearly in nature with simple things down here and complex organisms at the top of this chain of being. I don't think there was a single person who discussed the chain of being who didn't put humans at the top. And often they would put organisms like chimps rung down because people, when they first saw chimpanzees, everybody recognized that, boy, these guys look like very similar to people. And then you put worms and simple organisms down here. In fact, I remember there's one fellow even put crystals down here, and that was, crystals are clearly higher in the chain of being than things like dirt and mud, right? But I don't want to make fun of these people. They're just trying to make sense of what they see around them. And if you look around you in nature, some things are more complicated than others, right? But the chain of being, by the time Darwin came around, I wouldn't say it was totally discredited because many people believed that, but there was another idea, which was that life was organized hierarchically. And one of the main reasons that was the case is because one of the most successful classification systems was the Linnaean classification system, which you guys have all heard about. Kingdom, phylum, class, order, and so forth. That is a hierarchical system. If you think about drawing out the Linnaean hierarchy for a group of organisms, it looks kind of like a branching diagram, right? So people were used to thinking about Linnaean hierarchies and thinking about nature as perhaps being arranged hierarchically. Now, there were some ideas of evolution that predated Darwin's. The reason why these evolutionary ideas that predated Darwin's didn't really work is because they didn't have all the components of a successful theory of evolution. So, for instance, Darwin's own grandfather, Erasmus Darwin, had some ideas about what the people at that time called the non-fixity of nature, the fixity of species, the idea that maybe species could change through time. And in 1794, he wrote a book called Xenomia, which was just a lot of his ideas. But he had a passage which I've never actually read this in this class, but it's kind of interesting because you can see the nature of the writing, and you can sort of, if you read between the lines, you can sort of get an idea that he had some ideas of evolution. But this is what he says in 1794. This is almost 60 years before more than 60 years before Darwin published The Origin of Species. So here he goes. From this account of reproduction, it appears that all animals have a similar origin, that is, from a single living filament, and that the difference of their forms and qualities has arisen only from the different irritabilities and sensibilities, or voluntarities, or associabilities of this original living filament, and perhaps to some degree from the different forms of the particles of the fluids by which it has been first stimulated into activity, and that from hence, as Linnaeus has conjectured in respect to the vegetable world, it is not impossible that the great variety of species of animals which now tend to may have had their origin from the mixture of a few natural orders. Now, you read that, and I don't have any idea what sensibilities or voluntarities or associabilities are, but one thing is certain, the guy wasn't thinking about species as being fixed in nature. They could have originated from, as he says, may have had their origin from the mixture of a few natural orders, from a small number of organisms. This is Darwin's grandfather speaking, and he isn't alone. There's other people that have the same idea. So, for instance, you guys have all heard of Lamarck, right? Because it's like the high school teacher's favorite whipping boy, as far as I can tell. Lamarck had ideas about evolution as well, right? And why you hear about them is because they're wrong, right? But he had some ideas, right? The idea that species aren't fixed was right? It was his mechanism, his process was wrong. He had a process where, in a changing environment, an organism would itself adapt to that environment. And that single organism could pass on those traits it acquired over its lifetime to its offspring. We know that's wrong, right? But as a theory, as far as it goes at the time, this is early 1800s, it's not a bad one. It just happens to be a wrong theory. So one thing about science is, one thing about science is you have to be willing to put yourself out there occasionally and propose an idea that's on the edge and perhaps can be wrong. If you're going to go through your life as a scientist, never pushing the envelope, you're going to do science and maybe make a living, but it's not going to be a very exciting career, right? So to some extent, I find Lamarck an admirable individual because he did put himself out there. He did, talk about a process that could explain the pattern that people were seeing in the rock record and trying to explain the variety of creatures they saw on Earth today. He actually had a process that just happened to be wrong. Right? Darwin got it right, but Lamarck, his predecessor, just happened to get it wrong, which is life. That's it. So I want to talk a little bit about Darwin. So then we have Darwin, who had the first, I would call, successful theory of evolution because it has all those components we spoke about in the previous lecture. So a little bit about Darwin. There's many biographies on the man. His 200th birthday was in 2009. And so there was a bicentennial of his birth. There were a lot of special seminars and symposia. Several books about him came out. But there have been a lot of biographies on this famous man that have been published over the last couple of 100 years or so. Okay, and some of them are quite good if you're interested, and I can point you to some good ones if you're interested. So I'm not going to go into his life in much detail. You're not going to be required to know what his dog's name and things like that were. But I want you to have an idea of his life because it was a remarkable life in many respects. So I'll start off. He was born in 1809, February 12th, 1809. It's actually an easy date to remember if you know Lincoln's birthday. It's the same day and year as Lincoln. So two very famous people, two of my heroes, in fact, born on the same day and year. Of course, their situation at birth was really different. Lincoln was born in the frontier in a log cabin, whereas Darwin was born into wealth. His grandfather, Erasmus, who we've already mentioned, he was a doctor, a very successful doctor, as was his father. He was also a doctor with a very successful practice. They had a lot of money. Okay? And Darwin was raised in a very privileged environment. Originally went to school in Scotland for college. His father, it's a family business. Many of you probably have this experience yourself. Grandfather was a doctor. His father was a doctor. Darwin was slated to become a doctor himself, but in the time, this would be the late 1820s, this is before anesthesia, and he, as part of his classwork, witnessed a operation on a small child, which you can imagine is pretty grim without being knocked out, right? And he said, okay, that's it for no more of this doctor business. So he went back to his father saying, I don't really want to become a doctor. I don't think it's really what I'm made to do. And so father said, well, you got to do something with your life. So the default at that time for a person in his station was the clergy. Right? So he switched universities from, I can't remember, it's really trying not to the school in Glasgow, I can't remember which one it was, to Cambridge in England, studying to become a member of the clergy. And it sounds like he had a great time in college, as many people do. A lot of hunting and drinking and carousing. But one thing, he was very interested in natural history, and a number of his professors saw this. So he would go take long trips with Lyell, who was his geology professor, who at that time was revolutionizing geology. He had these ideas that he had uniformitarian ideas about how rocks were formed, and that he also had ideas that the Earth was quite old compared to what people at the time thought. He even speculated the Earth might be hundreds of millions of years old, whereas now, of course, we know it's 4.5 billion years old. And then he had a favorite botany professor, this guy Henslow, who would take him out along with the class on these long field trips. He had a pretty good undergraduate career, not necessarily stellar grades. He wasn't much of a mathematician, for instance, but they certainly caught some of the professor's eyes as having something special. And so when this opportunity came around 1831, to the Royal Navy at the time was doing lots of surveys around the world to chart the world's oceans, so their Navy ships wouldn't strike rocks and things like that. There was the HMS Beagle was going to take one of these trips where they're going to map the coast of South Africa, and they needed a naturalist to go along for the ride, basically. So this was not something the Navy, the person had two purposes. One was to collect specimens in an area that was unknown, but also this person would have to be a companion for the captain. So you have to remember this is a time when society was very class stratified in England, and the captain was a gentleman. If you know anything about the Navy men, the sailors at the time, even now perhaps, but certainly at the time they were a fairly rough lot. And so he needed somebody he could talk with over dinner. So anyways, Henslow recommended that Darwin be a great person for this trip. He was a gentleman, and he was an enthusiastic naturalist. He had an interview with this Captain Fitzroy, was his name. It's a great name for a captain. And the captain thought he was great, and so he was offered the position as the ship's naturalist. But the only problem is that his father said, you're going on a trip for 5 years, get on with your life. You already switched your career once, now you're telling me you want to go off on a trip, and he basically forbade it. But his uncle intervened and convinced his father that this was a real opportunity. So he was able to go on this trip. All right? So let's go over to let's see here. So here is Darwin at various times in his life. I said born in 1809, early paintings of the fellow from 1816 and 1840, before they really had daguerreotypes. Most people think, whenever I think of Darwin, I usually picture him as this guy right here, late in his life. But he was a young man. He got married shortly after the trip on the Beagle. He married his second cousin, or his first cousin rather, who was a member of the Wedgwood pottery clan. So a lot of people anybody know who Wedgwood pottery is? It's like maybe a lot of you guys will probably be discovering what Wedgwood pottery is when you get married. But it's basically fine china, and her family was the owner. They had that pottery manufacturing company. But anyways, so he had a family, lots of kids. There he is at 45 when he has lots of kids. He looks kind of angry, which if you've had kids, you probably recognize this gal. At least I can sympathize with the guy. And then 1874, about 15 years after he published The Origin of Species, and then today, if you visit London and you go to Westminster Abbey, which is basically every tourist goes to Westminster Abbey, look up his grave. It's kind of in the science wing of graves next to Newton's. So he was a justly famous man, and it was for the theory of evolution that he described in his 1859 book. And a lot of the ideas from the book came from this voyage he took on the HMS Beagle. It wasn't that he went off with the idea of evolution and the species weren't fixed in nature, but he was certainly introduced to a lot of these ideas. And in fact, he didn't even develop his ideas over the course of this trip. He was just, he would put ashore, he'd go out with his rifle and one of the other sailors and shoot everything in sight, skin them, put them in boxes, and send them back to the museums in London, where people were very eagerly unpacking these crates that he was sending back. He discovered lots of interesting fossils. He found a giant armadillo fossil as an example, and that kind of made him think, well, here you have a fossil armadillo, and armadillos, if you've seen them, are very unusual. One place you find them is in South America. So he took the trip, 5-year trip, down the coast of South America, and then up the west coast of South America. And you probably heard about, everybody knows about at least one stop on this trip, which is the Galapagos Islands, which now, and I think at the time too, were part of Ecuador. And in Ecuador, in the Galapagos Islands, they spent quite a bit of time going from island to island. And there were a couple observations he heard about, although they didn't really make the connection at the time. One was, for instance, that in having dinner with some of the locals, they claimed that if you were to show them a turtle shell, they could tell you what island the tortoise is from. So you probably know that the Galapagos Islands has all sorts of interesting critters, among them some of the largest land tortoises. So that's one thing, interesting fact he heard. And he also collected a large number of what he thought were mockingbirds, but turned out to be different species of finch. Okay, about 20 species of finch. So here's some of the species he saw on the islands: the Galapagos tortoise, giant tortoises. I love tortoises. I've actually got a large one, not one of these species, but a large one in our backyard. Marine iguanas, which had a very interesting lifestyle. And then, of course, like I said, he collected a large number of what he thought were mockingbirds, and he sent them back, and the ornithologists in the museum said, no, these aren't mockingbirds. These are a bunch of different finch species that he found. And that was kind of an interesting observation he learned after he returned. And it's kind of interesting, too, because he did not distinguish the islands from which he collected these birds, all these samples. It's not like he said, I found this bird, and it was on this island. He said Galapagos Island. So if he had really formulated his ideas by the time he was on the islands, he probably would have been a lot more careful about how he labeled the specimen. So it's pretty clear from everything people can tell that he did not form his ideas on the voyage, but shortly after he returned to London in about 1836. So when he returned, he married pretty rapidly after he returned, and he spent a lot of time talking to specialists about the specimens he collected. And he started up a series of notebooks, one of the earliest ones being the transmutation of species. It almost sounds like something you read in Frankenstein. But he had a notebook about his ideas on species changing over time. What else can I say about his life? Oh, one thing I should mention is, you think about his main contribution being the origin of species, but that occurred, what, 15 years after return, or more than 15 years, 20 or 30 years after he returned from his voyage. What was he doing in the meantime? Well, he wrote a very popular book on his travels that sold very well, and he spent about 10 years studying barnacles. So why would anybody study barnacles? So he spent 10 years, 10 agonizing years from his diaries, studying barnacles. And why would you do that? We have to remember, this is before people could get a PhD. So you can think about PhDs as being sort of your accreditation process for doing science, if you will, right? Obviously, you can do science without a PhD, but nowadays we have the system that allows you to apply for grants and get jobs in universities and so forth. At the time, they didn't have that system. It was a German system. It was the PhD system. It was just starting in Germany at the time. So in order to get your creds, so to speak, you had to become an expert in something. And he decided that he'd become an expert in barnacles. So he spent a lot of time and published a wonderful monograph on barnacles. But at that point, then he had the credentials as a scientist, and he had the respect of his peers in England and elsewhere. So anyways, he was working hard, and he was also developing his theory and amassing evidence for the theory we're going to describe in a bit, the details of his book. And it is the case that several of his close colleagues, including Henslow, his botany professor, knew of his ideas. He was very uncertain about how to approach people because he knew it was going to be an idea that might bring a lot of scorn for him. People might, as a gentleman, you're not supposed to do these things to upset the social order, so to speak. And so he was very trepidatious about introducing his ideas to his colleagues. But he did introduce the ideas to a number of his colleagues. And it's interesting to think about when would the origin of species really been published? Because it wasn't as if 1859 was the year where he finally had all his evidence together and published it. Rather, in 1858, he got a letter from a fellow named with the last name of Wallace. Alfred Wallace was his name, who was out in the middle of the South Pacific making his living selling insects, right? So to butterfly collectors and people like that. And he sent this letter to Darwin saying, look, Mr. Darwin, he was very respectfully addressed about these ideas about how species change over time, and would you please present this to the Royal Society, which Darwin was a member of, the idea being that Darwin would read this letter that he wrote to the other scientists. And Darwin read this thing and was horrified because, as he stated, it was a better abstract of his ideas than he himself could have written. Right? So he knew that he was going to be scooped if he didn't act quickly. So he showed this letter to some of his friends, the ones that knew that he had these ideas, and his friends arranged it in such a way that Darwin would read a short abstract in 1858 of his ideas along with Wallace's letter too. So they both would have both these letters, abstracts of the ideas read to the Royal Society. So that's when the idea was originally introduced, a year before the Origin of Species was written. And the interesting thing is that these papers had no effect on the field. In fact, the president of the Royal Society in his yearly summary for 1858 said, it's really too bad there were no big ideas this year. Right? And then, of course, they had both these papers were read in front of the Royal Society that year. So they didn't really have an effect, but Darwin had the fire lit under him, so to speak, and wrote what he called an abstract of his ideas, which is the Origin of Species. He actually originally had intended to write a much bigger book. If you've ever thumbed through or read the Origin of Species, you know already it's a pretty substantial book. Right? So that is the history of his life up to 1859 when the Origin of Species was published. The idea was pretty well accepted by most scientists within maybe 5 or 10 years. And I'm not going to really talk about his later life. He was a very sick man for most of his life. He was actually pretty miserably sick, and he died in the early 1880s. But I want to talk more about the Origin of Species. I want to talk in detail about his arguments in that book. And I think Berkeley is one of the few places that has a rhetoric major, right? How you structure arguments and how you can analyze the structure of an argument. The Origin of Species would be a good topic for any rhetoric major to study because it's a very well-structured argument. That's the way to think about it. He doesn't come right out and state his ideas about how evolution occurs, natural selection, the processes for which he's justly famous. Rather, he builds up his argument piece by piece, right? And in some ways, you can think of him as a cagey salesman, right? He's going to tell the reader a lot of things that the reader has no problem agreeing with. So as an example, he doesn't say this literally, but a cagey salesman would say something like, you want to be well-liked, don't you? And of course, the only possible answer is yes, I want to be well-liked. And says, you want to look good, right? And says, yes, I want to look good. And you want to be successful, make a lot of money? Of course, the only answer to that is yes. And then so after he gets you saying yes for a couple of rounds, the final thing is, so you need to buy my hair gel, right? That's kind of the cut and say, yeah, I guess I need your hair gel if I want to be good looking and successful and have lots of money, right? I mean, obviously, Darwin's arguments aren't that base, but the basic idea is he leads the reader through a lot of things the reader already knew, but were critical parts of his theory, right? So that once you sort of recognize these facts, the theory would become obvious to you. So let's start off with how he leads the reader through his arguments. The first chapter is on variation in domesticated animals and plants. Right? Once again, he's going to tell the reader things that the reader already knows. And what is this? So first of all, you have to realize that I myself am probably 2 generations removed from anybody who lived on a farm. I suspect a lot of you probably are the same way, maybe even more, I don't know. But at the time, in the Victorian period in England, most people actually lived on farms. Or if you're a gentleman, you might have a farm as part of your property and be intimately familiar with the raising of livestock. Okay? And if you're a farmer, you know that individuals vary. That if you have a litter of pups, that there's variation in the puppies for traits you can see. If you're interested in horses and you have a lot of horses being born on a farm, that there's variation in those horses for various traits. If you're raising cows and you have a milk or dairy production facility, you realize that there's some cows that produce lots of milk and some not so much. Right? So people recognize that there's variation. One of the interesting things Darwin did is there were lots of clubs at the time, especially in London, for people that were interested in different types of animals. So for instance, there were pigeon clubs, right, where these guys would come in and have monthly meetings where they bring in their favorite pigeons, right, that they were raising at home. And what they would do is they would, these pigeon fanciers is what they call themselves, would be interested in breeding pigeons that had interesting traits so they could make crazy-looking pigeons. So as anybody's seen pictures of pigeons that these fanciers would be breeding, you realize that they don't look like the pigeons that are walking around our campus at all, right? They look crazy. But it's because these individuals, these fanciers, were cognizant of the variation in pigeons and realized that these variations are heritable. That is to say, if the offspring resemble the parents. The surest way, I'll talk about selective breeding too. The farmer knew that the surest way to ensure that his next